being like, man, I don't think that if Jesus came back right now that I would go to heaven.
Not a day goes by that I don't remember that time in Africa when the Lord literally took me out of my place of comfort in a foreign land, and there he began to speak to my heart.
At the very end of my time in college, Jesus invaded my life through a number of amazing circumstances.
So at a time when people usually go to school to lose their faith, that's where really I came to know Jesus in my college years.
Instead of being on my way to Hawaii, I find myself on a missionary trip to the most difficult island in the hemisphere. I'm in Haiti. And I found what I've been always looking for. It was that inner peace. It was the purpose that God puts in your life.
And I laid there and I just surrendered to Jesus. And slowly the Lord began to take these things out of my life. Only Jesus can go from the inside and work out. And that is my story.
That is my story.
You know, and that's my story.
And that's my story.
And that is my story.
So each one of us has a story. And I think one of the keys of life is trying to realize that even in the midst of our individual stories, God wants to write a story. And when we allow Jesus to be the center of our lives, he begins to show us how every detail of that story was necessary. But until you allow Jesus to show you that, a lot of life just hurts a lot. A lot of things that go on just doesn't make any sense. And when I look at my story, I'm so grateful that I get to tell my story not as I experienced it, but how Jesus has shown it to me. I mean, I experienced it myself, but Jesus has this amazing way of retelling our stories with other details that you didn't realize. So I've always said that, and I've heard it said, that a biography is a story where there's someone who's the center of the story, and a testimony is a story where Jesus is the center. And the last thing I would ever want to do is to tell a story where I'm the center, because there's enough biographies in the world. So I want to tell my story with Jesus at the center of my story. And so in order to do that, I actually want to read you, I'm going to mirror my story off of a very famous passage. And so I want you to open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. If you didn't bring a Bible with you to church, don't worry about it, because all those books in the seats in front of you, those are Bibles. Of course, we also live in the day and age of the smart device. So if your device has the internet, just type in Luke chapter 15, picking up in verse 11, and you'll be able to follow along with this. I'm going to tell the story of what we know as the prodigal son, or the parable of the lost son. But oftentimes we don't realize that this story, the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son, is actually in the midst of three parables: one of a lost sheep, one of a lost coin, and then the lost son. And really the whole point of Luke chapter 15 and also Luke chapter 16 is that Jesus is fighting, or actually Jesus isn't fighting, the Pharisees are fighting with Jesus about who Jesus likes to spend time with. And really the parable of the lost coin and the lost sheep and the lost son is actually a story that Jesus is telling to the religious leaders, because they don't realize that God's kingdom isn't just for religious people. That the people that they look down upon are the very people that God is interested in. And I chose that for a reason as well, because by the time we get towards the end of the present day part of God's story in my life, I end up oftentimes feeling like I'm in trouble with the real religious people, because I don't look like a good religious pastor. It was funny, I was just talking to one of the guys who serves on our safety team, and he told me a story. He met a guy, and the guy, they started talking, and he was wearing a hat, and the guy said, "Where's that hat from?" He's like, "Oh, well, from Crossroads." Like, I used to go to Crossroads before they hired that hippie, Which I just love that, Some of you right now are like, dude, but all this weaves into the story here. So it says in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, it says, "And he said," speaking of Jesus, "a certain man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' And so he divided them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living or excessive living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And then he went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he had come to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? So this story tells a story of a man with these two sons. Now what's interesting is that the younger of the sons, he says, can you give me my portion of your inheritance? He's saying, I want what will come to me when you're gone, but I want it now, right? And so this was something that was supposed to be this young man's. It was his inheritance, right? But he wanted all the gifts without having to have a relationship with his father. And the father was gracious enough to give him all the gifts. And the guy says, well, okay, so I got all, now I'm out. And he left and he journeyed into a far country and he began to squander it. Now, to me, this is a beautiful picture of where my story begins because, you know, in a lot of ways, I've been just extraordinarily blessed. I was born December 31st, 1975. So I'm a twin too, so my parents started with a double tax deduction. Super stoked about that, you know, and I'm the youngest of 3 Fusco kids. I have an older sister named Trish, who's 2 years older, and then my twin sister, her name is Jody. So Trish is a teacher, Jody's a lawyer, and I was born into the most loving, all-Italian New York family you'd ever have heard of. So, you know, all like, you remember my big fat Greek wedding? If you make it Italian, that's my family. You know what I mean? And it's like, just really like, I grew up with a million cousins and aunts and uncles, later to find out most of the aunts and uncles actually weren't family, but they lived at our house like they were family, you know? And I was raised in what I would call a non-Christian Catholic family, which means we were culturally Catholic, but we didn't talk about Jesus at all, other than if you went to church. And most of the time growing up, going to church, I liked church in the beginning because my mom would, if we were good in church, would sneak us a little bit of the bread. Seriously. So she's like, if you're good, I'll give you a snack, you know, it's the body of Jesus of the Catholic Church, you know? And so if we were good, she'd sneak us a little snack, and that was kind of fun for a while until you realize it's just some stale bread. And so, but I remember one of my first memories of going to church, I remember telling my parents that I wanted to be a priest, you know, and they just kind of laughed, and that was it. And so although I wasn't raised with Jesus as part of, like we never talked about it. There was a Bible that they had, and it stayed in the closet. And we went to church from time to time. I grew up outside of Christ, but incredibly loved, you know, not only by my dad and my mom, you know, but also my mom's parents, my grandma and grandpa. They lived around the corner, so I had like a second set of parents as well. They were like, my grandparents were like the cool parents. So if I got upset with my parents, I'd go to my grandparents' house, and my grandma, you know, because I was her first grandson. So if you know anything about Italian grandmas with their grandsons, that means that I was born with a halo around my head. I've never done anything wrong. If my grandma asks you, you say, oh, Danny's perfect, and she'll be like, oh, my Danny, you know? And so I would literally get in trouble with my parents, and I would go to my grandparents' house, and I would complain about my parents, and my grandma would feed me, and she'd feed me more, and she'd talk to me, and then my mom would call, is Danny there? And she'd say, no, what'd you do? But I was sitting right there. You know what I mean? So my grandma, I just got a super sweet place in my heart. Now, I do need to say that I've called myself Danny here from the pulpit many times. I always tell you, the only people who can call me Danny is my wife, my grandma, or if you're coming bearing cannolis. So, but I grew up in a beautiful environment. I was born in New Jersey and raised there. And in a lot of ways, as I came into my teenage years, this story begins to mean something to me, because what I didn't realize at the time is that when each one of us is born, God places gifts and talents and strengths and purpose in your life, all of us. The things that I see are going on now in the way that God is working in my life and through my life, these things were already there when I was younger. But like the son who gets lost in this parable, I had all these gifts, but I wanted to do what I wanted to do outside of the Father. I wanted to enjoy all of these gifts without any connection to the Father who gave me those gifts. And I think that's a common story for people who grow up outside of Christian homes, where you don't realize that God is entrusted. Every gift that you have, every talent that you have, everything that you have is on loan. And outside of Christ, you're utilizing those gifts, but outside of a relationship. And so I grew up playing sports a lot. I grew up in theater. My mom was really into theater, so me and my sisters we danced and we sang and we acted in plays, and I played sports. And so I actually grew up in front of people, my whole life. I look at it now, I'm like, wow, it's amazing that was part of my story. And I see as a pastor now, getting to talk with people, it's like some people get horrified getting up in front of people. It's just, I've always been in front of people, just from a young age. And so it became very, very natural. And so as I moved into my middle school years and my high school years, I was predominantly playing sports, and I was also playing a lot of music. So because of Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue, I wanted to be a bass player. If you don't know who that is, don't Google it. But if you know who that is, then you know how that was. Actually, I really wanted to be a drummer, if truth be told. So I actually, my parents always encouraged us in the arts that, my mom did. My dad wasn't really too fond of it. And so I said I wanted to play drums. And my parents said, well, if you take drum lessons for a year, then you can get a drum set. So I took drum lessons, and I practiced on a little drum pad for a whole year. And then at 1 year, I said, it's 1 year, can I get my drum set? And my mom said, yes, you can. And I got a drum set, and the next day, 3 of my buddies came over our house with amplifiers and stuff. And my mom came home from work, and not only was the house shaking, but the whole neighborhood was shaking. And my mom said, yeah, you can't be a drummer anymore. And so, because she realized that the drummer, the bad garage band plays at the drummer's house. And so she's like, yeah, we're not doing that. And so I'm like, well, I can't be a drummer, so I'll be a bass player. And so, and because of my love of Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue, I got a bass, and the next day I was in 2 bands. It's a classic bass player story. No one wants to be the bass player, but you got a gig. And so I started playing music. By the time I moved into high school, I'm doing really well in school. I was pretty popular in school. But I also began to party a lot. It started when I was probably a freshman in high school, and being promiscuous began in middle school for me. So, outside of Jesus, these were just things that you did and how it worked. And so, very quickly, as I'm in high school, I'm doing well in school. I'm decently popular. I'm playing varsity baseball my sophomore year. And I'm playing in bands, and very quickly, although everything's going well, I'm not doing well. I joked on Sunday, I don't run very much, except I was running from the police. And I did a lot of that growing up, where it was like we were just into a lot of mischief. I look back on those days now, and it was like another lifetime. I just think all the different times that I should have been arrested, that I almost died. I mean, all those stories are in my story. And as high school progressed, I knew I was going to go to college. My parents pretty much told me that school ended when I got a bachelor's degree. So it was never a question of if I was going to go to college. And so by the time I'm a senior in high school, I end up winning student council president, and I won homecoming king. But I had dreadlocks, and I wore plaid pants and a Getty shirt to the homecoming dance. So I'm not your normal homecoming king. And yes, very strange. And I had dreadlocks and my first head of dreads. And I remember I was really into music. I was playing in a band. I'm not going to say their name, but the band was a wild band, and we would play these huge shows. And I was at that age. I'm 18, or 17 at the time, and like we'd play these shows, and part of the way the promoters would pay us would give us cases of beer, you know, and they say, whatever you do, don't tell them you got it from us, you know, and it was just a bad scene, and so everything was kind of off the rails, and I get into college. I wanted to go to Rutgers University in my native state of New Jersey. It was in New Brunswick, was a funky kind of urban environment, and it was really where I wanted to go to school, and so I get into school, and things went from bad to worse because it was one thing to be crazy in my parents' house, and it's another thing to be crazy when you're not in your parents' house. And so there was no curfews and there was no deadlines, and so, but I knew that if I kept my grades up, my parents would leave me alone. And so, to be honest with you, I ended up graduating college with honors, all 4 years. That's by the grace of God, you know. And I was probably only sober for 8 months of that time. And I mean like sober, like, you know, like didn't do anything, but everything else was like I would smoke marijuana like people smoke cigarettes if you're addicted to cigarettes. And that was my life. And so, but what happened was a number of things happened in the early part of college. You know, I look at this guy in the story, and he's living prodigally. He's living excessively, which is what I was doing. And I remember I said I was sober for about 8 months because in the beginning of my sophomore year of college, I had a bit of an identity crisis because I was super popular and people were, you know, I had lots of friends and I was playing in a popular band in college and all this stuff was going on. But I'm like, you know, I don't think anybody actually likes me. I think they just like me because I'm fun, you know. And so I really started to struggle. Like if I didn't show up, you know, with a ton of drugs or with a fun band or with like an entourage of friends, does anybody really like me? So I decided I wasn't going to do any drugs and see if I had any friends after it was over. You know, and what was really fascinating is that what I learned is that the way that I was raised in New Jersey, the people who are the closest to you, they'll be friends for life no matter what you do. You know, and I have some friends who I grew up with who didn't, you know, they're like, yeah, it's like you're kind of boring, but, you know, like we've been at this forever. Let's just keep at it. I'm grateful for those friends. They're friends of mine to this day, you know, and so I decided to stop partying, and then I began to really focus on music. That became a passion. And at the same time, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And so my mother was a larger-than-life personality. We actually just celebrated, not celebrated, but we remembered her, the 20th anniversary of my mother's passing was just on the day before the 4th of July. And, you know, so my mother got cancer, and that was kind of that rocked my world pretty strongly, because I remember my first head of dreads, I shaved them off because my mom lost all her hair, and so I figured I'd stand in solidarity with mom, you know. So I came home one day. My mom never liked the dreads, and she's an Italian mom, so she was real vocal about that, you know. And so I remember one day I came home and I had my hat on, I stuffed newspapers in it, and when I got home, you know, I took my hat off, and she started to cry because she knew you just shaved them off because I have no hair, you know. And so it's kind of like, she's like, you look so much better, but she hated it, you know. And so my mom got sick, and then I was also just really struggling, and I realized that because I didn't have a spiritual bone in my body. You know, in some ways, from the time I was about 15 to about 20, I was like a self-proclaimed hedonist. Like if it felt good, I'm gonna do it, you know. But the problem is when you live that way, and I think some of you are living that way right now, what you realize is that at some point, it doesn't feel good anymore, but you still do it because it's all the only way you know how to live. And I was at that point where I'm just like, you know, this is what I've always done, this is how I've always lived, but it doesn't do it for me anymore. Like I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of waking up and just being like, is that all this is? You know, it all felt so superficial and skin deep and a waste of time. And I had all these things. And so at that time, I started reading spiritual books that I started reading. Because I grew up in a Catholic family, I wasn't going to read about Jesus. I mean, Jesus seemed like the last person that was even remotely relevant to my world. So I started reading a lot about Buddhism. I would read about these people who would go take hallucinogens and go on vision quests. That sounded fascinating to me at the time, you know. And I would hang out with Hare Krishnas because they'd give you free vegetarian food. And so I became a vegetarian in college because I had an Italian mom and an Italian grandma, so meatloaf wasn't supposed to look like that. And so I didn't do it for social reasons. I did it for like I just can't eat food that looks like that in college. So like the meat looked wrong, and so I'm just not gonna eat any of that stuff. And so I really love the fact that the Hare Krishnas gave you free food because I was in college. And so I hung out with all these people and I would be, reading books. And I had 2 friends who had given their lives to Jesus in that time and weren't really walking strong with the Lord, but were talking about Jesus with me. And I had a psych professor. I had gotten really, really good at sleeping through exams in college. But I also realized that if you would go to the teacher's office hours, and if you would talk to them and tell them how grateful you are for what they do and how impacting it is to your life, schmooze them a little bit, and they'd let you retake the exam. And for those of you going to college, I don't recommend sleeping through your exam, but that did work for me, And so I would go, and I went to this one professor, and out of all these professors, like, oh, thanks, yeah, you can take the exam, get in my office, But this one adjunct professor who was a grad student, I know now, even though I didn't hear it from him, he's a believer. At the time, I would never have known, but there's something different about him. He was the one person who ever asked me any questions about myself. And he said, I'll never forget, he said to me, he's like, so can I ask you something? He's like, look, so he's like, every time you show up to class, you look hammered. You sleep through every exam, but then when you take it, you get an A on it. So like, what's your deal? And I'm just like, oh, well, start rambling on and on. And I was telling him, he's like, well, and I was reading philosophy and metaphysics, and I was reading this and that. And I'll never forget, he said to me, well, do you believe Jesus was a spiritual teacher? And I said, yeah. Some people believe that. And he's like, well, do you believe the Bible's a spiritual book? I'm like, well, yeah. Like, people hold that, yeah. He's like, well, it sounds like you've kind of read everything else, so I think it'd probably be intellectually dishonest of you not to read the teachings of Jesus. Yeah. It's a professor in Jersey, baby, It's like not playing around. And so I'm like, yeah, I should do that. And so that happens. My mom's sickness gets really, really bad, to the point where they gave her a clean bill of health. She went back to work. 6 months later, we were sitting at the breakfast table, and all of a sudden, she can't talk and she can't move her fork. And we're like, oh, no. And she went back in, and it was what was lung cancer and brain tumors became bone cancer and cancer everywhere. And so it got really bad, really, really fast. And so all this is all happening. And my mom, at the end of her life, she wouldn't fall asleep at night because she was scared she wouldn't wake up in the morning. And so my grandparents moved back in with us to take care of my mom. My dad was working, and my grandparents shouldn't be up all night. And so I said, hey, I'm always up all night, so I'm your guy. So I sent my grandparents to bed, and I would sit with my mom, and my mom would doze off, and she would wake up. But there were times when she would ask for me to read the Bible to her. She had gotten her little red Gideon's Bible from the hospital. First time I'd ever seen my Bible out in my house. And I remember reading to my mom Psalm 23, John 14, John 14, do not be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, that I will come again. I will receive you to myself, that where I am, there you will always be. It's memorized now, but at the time I just remember reading it to her. And I remember when my mother finally passed away after 2 years, July 3rd, 97, I remember at that point I just said, if there is a God, he can kiss my butt. That was the way I felt. I was angry. I was just like, this is not how life's supposed to be. And it kind of rocked my world. And all these things together, about the beginning of April 1998, Jesus intervened in my life while I was reading my Bible in my apartment, reading Matthew's gospel with a simple prayer. Jesus, if you're real, I'm wide open. Reveal yourself to me. Didn't happen right away. I'd been praying that prayer a couple times. I told one of my friends, yeah, that whole prayer thing, ain't nothing to it. God's quiet. But God works on his own timing. Now from there, I get saved, I graduate college, and in a lot of ways, like the prodigal son, like at that moment I realized that my life wasn't my own, that I'd never had an independent day in my life, even though I lived an independent life. that everything about my life, I was dependent. The air that I breathed, the food that I ate and was able to digest, the ability to think thoughts, it's like something happens when you watch someone take their last breath, like I saw with my mom, where you realize her body's there, but she's not there. Like those things were huge. Like I didn't know what to do with those things. And so then when Jesus intervenes in my life, all of a sudden, all of these things start to make sense now. Where you're like, oh, because her spirit has now left her body. And so it all comes together. Now at that time, I'm like the guy who finally realizes in my Father's house, everyone's got it. Now, it says in verse 18, in Luke 15, it says, "And I will arise and go to my Father's house, and I will stand with him. And I will say with him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." And he arose and he came to his father. And when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and he kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now I think this is fascinating, because as the son is coming home to his dad, he has this whole like, I'm so sorry, I'm an idiot speech. And like the dad doesn't even let him get it out. Because the father is so excited that his son is coming home that the father comes and grabs him and loves him and brings out the service. Like, we're throwing a party because you're home. And what I learned when I came to know Jesus is that that's the heart of the father. When a child comes home, the father runs to them. So you can imagine the father waiting for his son, wondering what's going on. The father's looking at the hillside every night. Will my son come home? See, what I learned when I gave my life to Jesus is that God isn't interested in me telling him everything I did wrong. What God is interested in is that I'm home, because God wants a relationship. That's what he wants. And all he wants was to come home. And what happened for me is when I came to know Jesus, God embraced me. And I was willing to let him do that because I was so busted up from everything that had gone on. Years of drugs, years of parties, never having like stable life. And then you lose your mom and everything's, and God just grabbed hold of my life. Now, I graduated college in New Jersey and I immediately moved to the West Coast because I was going to pursue a career in music. So I've been really playing the bass, the upright and the electric bass. I've been practicing hours every day, playing hundreds and hundreds of hours of gigs. And so I decided I'm going to move to Ashland, Oregon, of all places. And so the reason I moved to Ashland, Oregon was I didn't want to move to New York because I didn't feel like I was ready. And my honorary uncle, Frank Sinatra, said, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And I wasn't ready to make it in New York. And I figured if I didn't move, I was going to spend my whole life in like just one little place in the world. And not that that's bad. Actually, I've grown as I've gotten older to appreciate a sense of place. But I decided to move, and I didn't want to move to a major city, so I had friends who say, oh, go to Ashland, it's a cool, funky town, an art town, and it'll be fun there. And so I moved there with some buddies of mine, and we began to play music. And it was a blast. I was living my dream. We spent a couple years in Ashland, Oregon. I got plugged in to a great church there called Ashland Christian Fellowship. At the time, a man named Andy Green was the pastor. Andy's now home with the Lord. What's beautiful is in our Southwest Portland campus, Andy's wife, Paige, is there. His daughter, Sarah, they're all part of the church family at our Southwest Portland campus now. God really used this church to embrace, I grew another set of dreads and, to embrace like a really kind of out there musician who God was doing a work in his life. And they invited me on the worship team, and Pastor Andy invested a lot in my life. I taught my first Bible study at that church. The pastor's wife, Paige, and his daughter, Sarah, were at my very first Bible study. Actually, Paige showed me the notes in her Bible from that Bible study. And what is fascinating, though, and I failed to mention it, when my mother passed away, the very first time I ever spoke in a pulpit was at my mother's service where I gave her eulogy. I didn't remember that until just the other day when my twin sister, Jody, reminded me of that the very first time I'd ever spoken in church was at my mom's funeral. So I'm playing music, and God's doing a work in my life, and we decided to move from Ashland to the San Francisco Bay Area and to pursue music. And so I get to the Bay Area, and I'm pursuing music. I'm playing with a great group. We're touring. All this stuff's going on. But I'm having this uneasiness in my heart. There was a discontentment in my heart. Now, here's what I want to say. All of us know what discontentment feels like, but the key is, can you discern, is it a holy or an unholy discontent? Is it a unholy discontentment because God wants to change your heart, because your heart's wrong? Or is it a holy discontentment where actually your heart is right, God wants to change your circumstances? He wants you to make a hard decision. Being able to discern those two things is important. Because a lot of times our dissatisfaction is because God wants to change our hearts because our hearts are wrong. That's what I call an unholy dissatisfaction. But when it's a holy one, it's because God wants to do something. And what I realized was, I'm like, man, something's going on. And I remember reading about fasting in the Bible. I thought to myself, and I've said it before, why on earth would anyone want to skip a meal? You know, like I'm all Italian, so it's like food's a love language. You know, like when I'm eating, I feel God's pleasure, you know? And so there was no, like the idea of skipping a meal. So I asked my pastor at the time, John Henry Corcoran, he's in San Francisco Bay Area. I was going to church there. I asked him about fasting. He explained it to me. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to fast. I said, I'm going to fast for 2 days. So I wake up in the morning, only drinking water. By about 11 o'clock, I'm the angriest person. Like I'm hangry. Like I have never skipped breakfast in my life. You know, and I'm so angry. I was so angry I had to take a nap. So I took a nap because I'm like, I can't do this, you know, and I slept. I took like a 2-hour nap, and I woke up, and it was about 1:30 or 2 o'clock. And I woke up, and I was tired and hungry. But then there was this amazing clarity in my life, and I began to pray and seek the Lord. And very quickly, I felt like the Lord said, Daniel, I have something else for you. I've given you the gift of music, but I don't want you to do it as a career. There's something else I want you to do. And I felt the calling to be a pastor. And so like any college-educated person, when you're a pastor, you go to seminary. That's what you do. You go to school. Love school. Nothing better than getting paid to read books. So if anyone's struggling with school, it's a gift, man. Like your job is to read. How cool is that? So going to seminary, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to seminary. So I got all these applications. Now I didn't even think for a second that nobody would accept me to seminary because I literally like only play on the worship team, you know. But I fill out all these applications and I begin praying over the applications before I send them. So I got 4 applications, they're all filled out, essays, the whole 9. And I'm praying over them. I feel like the Lord says, I want you to throw them out because I want to use you right now. So I was like, oh. Okay, so I threw him out, and I said, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. And I decided that I was going to move back to Ashland, Oregon. I'd only been in the Bay Area for a little while. I didn't know anybody. And so I was going to move back into Ashland, and I sat down with my pastor at the time in Marin County, so North Bay of San Francisco, John Henry Corcoran. And he was just like, so what's God doing with you? I'm like, well, I think I'm called into the ministry, but I don't know. I'm moving back up to Ashland. And I'll never forget, he said, well, why don't you stay here? We could use you here. And I was like, oh, well, I already made a commitment to go teach this Bible study, so I can't. So I literally turn around, move back up to Ashland. I'm up in Ashland for 3 days, and the Lord's like, you're supposed to be in the Bay Area. This is my life, man. Like, this is me, you know. I was like, I'm always in the wrong spot, you know. I'm in God's timeout chair, but he does the great work, you know. And so sure enough, I finished this Bible study I'm teaching. I move back down, and I get taken on staff as an intern at this church with my pastor, John Henry Corcoran, who discipled me and taught me the work of ministry in real time. I started off as an intern. $500 a month was my salary. That was also my rent. So you take the rent, take your salary minus your tithe, you're already negative $50. You know, and I do believe in giving as unto the Lord. So that was my every month thing. And I'm here to tell you, I never missed a rent check. It was amazing life experience. Like there were times when I'm like, man, how am I supposed to, you know, if I have no food. Like I was the guy where when I would tell people, if you found rice, bananas, or carrots on sale, let me know. Because you know, like with those 3 things, you can do a lot. You know what I mean? So, and so I lived on that stuff. But there were times when I couldn't afford groceries and I'd show up home and there'd be a bag of groceries. I wouldn't tell anybody. There was one time when there was no way I was going to be able to pay my rent because I had not only my tithe, but I had my car broke. And so I remember I woke up in the morning, and the guy who I live with was also a brother in the Lord. And in all these things, I wasn't going to tell anyone my problems, because it's really easy, like, God's going to provide, but I'm going to go tell everybody. It's like, So I'm like kind of like George Mueller, if you know him, just like testing the Lord on all this stuff. So I'll never forget, because that morning I woke up, I'm like, hey, I'll give you the rent check later today. And he's like, oh yeah, no worries. And then a little later in the day, I saw him and I'm like, I'm going to give you the rent check. He's like, you know what, actually, I'm going to pay your rent this month. I'm like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, it was funny. He's like, after you said you're going to give me the rent check later today, I felt like the Lord said you should pay Daniel's rent. And I just dismissed that. I said, forget that. I don't want to pay Daniel's rent. He can pay his own rent, And he's like, and then I was out driving, and I just really felt like the Lord said, I'm supposed to pay rent. And I said, well, okay, praise God, And I told him months later I didn't have the money for the rent. Like I was like waiting for him. Like, okay, Lord, how's this gonna work? I'm like, like, what are you doing here? And he took care of it every step of the way. So I started as an intern, then I became an actual real staff member, and then I became a junior high pastor, and then a high school pastor, and then I became the assistant pastor, and then we hit that point where I felt God was stirring my heart to plant a church. And so I made the commitment that, at this time I'm 24 years old. So I'm like, wet behind the ears, I'm green, whatever the terminology you want, that was my story. And I said, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to wait for my pastor to talk to me about it. I'm not going to precipitate this. I'm just going to, Lord, if this is you, you got to work this out. I trust that the man you have me serving with hears your voice. He's impacted my life. I love my pastor, John Henry. I got to spend time with him last week. Love his wife, Hillary. She's like a big sister to me. Hillary put me and Lynn together. It's a whole other story for another day. I'll never forget it though. Me and John Henry, he said, hey, let's go get some lunch. This is about 2-3 weeks later. And we're sitting at lunch, and John Henry says, so I love having you as my assistant pastor. I'm like, oh man, John Henry, this is like the greatest experience of my life serving with you. He taught me what a godly man was like, what a godly husband looked like, what a godly dad looked like. So much of the stuff I do with my kids, I learned from my pastor, watching his life, and he said, but I feel like I've taught you everything I know, and I feel like God has more for you. He's like, if I thought you were going to be an assistant pastor for the rest of your life, I'd keep you here forever. Because we're having a blast, so much fun. And he's like, so, like, has God given you a vision to plant a church, or do you want me to find a church for you? I almost like choked on my Chinese food, And I started to share with him. I said, I'm like, it's amazing that you're talking to me about this, because this and this and this, and I got this, and this is what God's shown me. I think I'm supposed to move back to New Jersey and plant a church. And I'm like, but you have to tell me if I'm supposed to do this or not, because I don't trust my own judgment. I'm young, and I'm zealous, and I'm probably wrong. And he's like, well, let me pray about it. And he prayed for me there, and about a week later, he came in. He said, so God gave me a word for you. And I said, oh. And he said, and he brought me to in Deuteronomy, where God told Moses that you've skirted this mountain too many times. And he says, so God showed me that I need to send you out. You should go to plant that church in New Jersey. And so him and the elders of the church, they laid hands on me, and they sent me back across the country to start a church in New Brunswick, New Jersey, when I was 24 years old. And so I showed up in New Brunswick. So I'm a single guy starting a church. I had no money, no people. Last time I was in New Brunswick, New Jersey, I was like way high, and not high on the spirit. I was like high on drugs, And it was funny, like, I didn't know any believers either, And so I show up in this town with my Bible, the Spirit of God, and a vision to start a church. And I remember we didn't have any money, so I found out if you were a campus minister with Rutgers, they'd give you free building. You can rent in their thing for free. So I'm like, oh, I can get that done. So I stood out. I had to get 15 names of students who was even interested in this campus ministry. That was this church. It took me 3 days. I stood outside in front of the Rutgers Student Center for 3 days, talking to anyone who would even remotely talk to me. Imagine that, 3 days to get 15 signatures. I should have known I was in trouble, because I got the 15 signatures. The first service, I think there was 8 people at it, and I think the tithe was like $11. I was working at a restaurant, to supplement my income. No missionary support, just like you're just trusting the Lord. And I'm doing evangelism. And some of the first people who came, one guy was Orthodox Jewish. He's like, I've just never been to church before, so I'm gonna come to your church. This is wild, So we started this church, and over the course of a number of years, the church grew from 8 people. And I could tell you stories for days and days. And so there's the Q&A time too, if you want to hear some more details about some of this. In the midst of that, I met my wife, Lynn. Actually, I met Lynn when I was in the Bay Area. We had 2 conversations totaling about 13 words. 12 of them were mine, And God put Lynn and I together. She was actually doing a YWAM DTS, and she was living in Chico, California, finishing up her schooling, and I was in New Jersey, and God kind of arranged our marriage in a really fascinating way. If you really want to hear the story, ask Lynn the story, because when I go to tell it, she ends up telling it better than I do anyway. So I just sit back and I just enjoy the ride of our story. We got married in the midst of that. We got pregnant right away with Obadiah. And she got pregnant, but I was involved in that too, and we really started to feel called to leave New Jersey. I never thought I was going to live in New Jersey forever. I felt like I was supposed to start a church there. And so we had raised up a pastor, Jason Falzerano, who was just an amazing guy. I love this guy so much. And so he took the church over. We moved back to the Bay Area and started a church in Mill Valley, California, which is in the southern part of Marin County. And then also we ended up starting a church in San Francisco in the Marina District. So I was pastoring 2 churches at the time. And I remember at this point in my life, I had like a preppy haircut. I was shaving my beard. I was, totally clean shaven because I thought that's what a pastor was supposed to be. And I'll never forget, I was praying and I felt like the Lord just said to me, he said, Daniel, like you're being a poser. Like, and listen, when the Lord calls you out that you're a poser, it's kind of a bad thing, But he's like, this is not who I created you to be. This is who you think you're supposed to be. Like you think people are gonna like you as a pastor because you have short hair and because you have nice and clean shaven and you're wearing button-down shirts and khakis and stuff. Like this is not, like I created you differently because I want to use you differently. And I was really challenged by that because I had kind of gotten really settled in as like, this is what a pastor's supposed to be, like together and all this stuff. And so I remember, Lynn still remembers that. I'm like, listen, I'm going to grow my hair out again. And she's just like, what? And so, and we just talked about it. And so in the midst of all that, I started growing this set of dreads and I stopped shaving, praise God. It's like, it's nothing. And I'm also, you realize like I'm not knocking if you shave, but like I'm the kind of guy who I get a 5 o'clock shadow at 8:30. Like I'm all Italian, so it's like I can shave, but it's like I'm real scruffy at 8. Like I shave at 7, I'm scruffy at 8. Like my chin is lethal by 4 in the afternoon. Like it's like I could hurt somebody, And so shaving was tough, man. I was like one of those guys who would have like the electric shaver in the car, like going to a meeting, trying to look like I belong. And so in the midst of all that, so I planted 3 churches and learned so much. But in the midst of all of that, God began to stir my heart again, and I felt like God wanted me to take a step of faith. So I was in the process of turning over these 2 churches in the Bay Area, and I felt like the Lord said to me, Daniel, I want you to walk by faith. And so I remember so I planted a church in San Francisco, so I wrote down on an index card all these cities that I thought, that I heard horror stories about people planting churches in. So hard, so like places like Sedona, Arizona, because it's a vortex. Yeah, I'm like, I'll plant a church in a vortex. That sounds fun, Burlington, Vermont was on that list. And Portland was on the list, and Spanish Harlem was on the list. There's a couple places that were like, that I'm like, yeah, like, because after you plant a church in San Francisco, like, I don't want like an easier job. You know, and then I'm like, am I supposed to go on the mission field? Like, what are we supposed to do? And me and Lynn were praying, and Bill Ritchie and I connected, and he started talking to me about Crossroads. You know, and it was like the conversations were super casual and not anything specific. But very quickly, I started to feel like the Lord was like, you're supposed to do that. And I was like, no way. You know, it's like walking by faith is one thing, but when you're like a pioneer church planter, like a renegade, dreadlock church planter in San Francisco, like the last place you want to go is be the pastor comes after Bill Ritchie. Good night. You know, it's like Bill with his suits and his perfect sermons, like everything's like perfect. You might not know that about Pastor Bill, but Pastor Bill writes all of his sermons, whole manuscript, right? Memorize it and then preaches it like he hasn't, like, and it's, you guys know that about him? I've held the manuscript, watched him preach, and I'm like, how does this guy do this? He's like a classical composer, but he memorized the whole score. It's unbelievable what Pastor Bill does. And I'm like, yeah, I am not gonna be the guy who follows Bill Ritchie. Thanks anyway. You know, and so God's really stirring my heart for this thing. He's really like doing a work and he's working me over. I'm like, no, you know, like I'm in God's timeout chair always, you know, no, I'm not gonna do that. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. No, you know, and it's like, and then I hit the point where I'm like, if I don't do this, I'm sinning against God, right? And what was so funny about this is I talked to a good friend of mine and I said, so I think I'm gonna go move up to Vancouver, Washington. He's like, you're not gonna go to Crossroads with Bill Ritchie, are you? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, they're gonna hate you up there. Good friends, you know, like I love people who tell me the truth. Like, they're gonna hate your guts when you get there. And then I had another friend, like they invented the interim pastor for situations just like this. Because, you know, the interim pastor is the guy who goes in after the great pastor, and everyone hates the interim pastor so they don't kill the real pastor who's coming after the interim pastor, you know? And so, like, all this is going on, and I feel like the Lord's like, no, I want you to walk by faith. Like, planning a church was easy for me at that point. I knew how to do it. I knew how to just get a job, and you drink a lot of coffee and go crazy, and church starts, and it's wild. He's like, but walking into Crossroads, I had no clue what was going on. And so I get to Crossroads 5.5 years ago. Can you believe it's 5.5 years? Some of you are like, yeah, I can believe it's 5.5 years. Feels like an eternity, 50 years. But one of the things that I've learned a lot about the Lord kind of comes in this last section of this story. Because the father's excited about the prodigal son coming home, but not everyone's excited. Because look what it says in verse 25. It says, now his older son was in the field, and he came and he drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing, and he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and he pleaded with him. And so he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I've been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It is right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost, but now he's found. See, it's fascinating. The brother comes home, and the older brother isn't there, and he comes back and he hears the joy. And he's like, what's up with this? He said, well, your brother's back. And instead of being excited that the crazy, excessive brother's home, he's mad, and he goes complains to the father. And he says to the father, I'm always with you. You never let me do this. This guy goes and wastes his life, and you bless that guy? And in a lot of ways, what I love so much about what God is doing in our church family right now is the fact that in some ways, Crossroads is like the excessive son who comes home, and there's a lot of people who watch what God is doing here, and they say, why? That guy's got long hair. That other guy's got tattoos up in his neck and stuff. And then you got the disco dancing Brooklyn guy, you know? And then you got the youth pastor who's got the big beard, but he's got a Texan accent. And then you got Bill Ritchie's son, Jason, who's like, texts you while he's playing the piano and he's singing and he's like writing a book, you know? And like, why is God doing something at Crossroads, you know? And then they say, well, it's not right, you know? It's not right that people are getting saved there. It's not, you know, and people get like that. But what I also realize is that part of what God has called me to is to be a bridge for people who have yet to know Christ, and also challenge people who've gotten comfortable judging a book by its cover. Because I think what goes on in the church is that we are in the church so long and we value holiness because God values holiness and he is holy, but we begin to realize that the only reason a person is holy is not because of their haircut or their dress, but because Jesus shares his holiness with people when they say yes to him. And it's so easy for people to want to dismiss the unique work that God is doing in our midst for superficial reasons. But one of the things I love about what God is doing here is that Crossroads isn't only a church of, you know, people who lived prodigal lives. It's a church of people who stayed close to the Father. It's a church of people who've been married many times and who've been married for a long time to the same person. And because of the grace of God, he's like, I can cover all of this and I can make you guys family. And for me, the last 5.5 years at Crossroads has been some of the most amazing experiences of my life. It's been the most humbling and challenging. I've come face to face with my own mistakes, my own failings as a leader. You know, Bill Ritchie told me, he said, Dan, you know what the problem with being here is? So many people are watching, everyone will see your flaws. He said, have fun. That's what he said to me. Total Pastor Bill, just like, good luck, you know? But the mistake that the older brother here makes is that he doesn't realize that the Father heart of God is not afraid of where we've been. The Father heart of God is not afraid of how many mistakes someone makes or how many flaws they have or how many doubts they have. You notice the Father doesn't even care that the Son came home broken because the Son is home. And when I look at the people of God in this day and age, the biggest mistake that the church is making is you have to be together to go to church. It's like, unless you got it all together, you shouldn't walk in the doors. In many churches, if you show up with brokenness, you have to just stuff that stuff. And we live in a day and age where people aren't going to stuff who they are anymore. We're tired of that. We did enough of that for so long, putting on the pasted smile and the fake clothes. It's like, and the church has found itself on the wrong side of the heart of God. And one of the things I love about Crossroads, especially for those of you who've been here from before I got here, I want to thank you for opening up your heart to so many people who maybe never would have walked into church unless they saw a dreadlock guy and like, I can go to that church with the hippie guy. And they found family here in your lives, your investment. We've allowed Crossroads to become one of the messiest places I've ever experienced. But so beautiful, because in the midst of this wild garden, God is blossoming a harvest of people. And I'll be honest with you, my story is a story of a guy who wasted his life, who came home, and I feel like God's throwing a party because I came home, and I just want everyone to be there. That's it. But what's sad in this story is you never actually know what the older brother does. Does he end up going in? Does he end up celebrating at a lost brother who was found? Does he just leave mad? But it reminds me that all of us, our only job is to simply respond to Jesus. For the younger brother, it was coming home. For the older brother, it was going in and rejoicing because your father's heart is glad because your loser brother came home. Everyone has a choice to make. Now, I realize that for some of you here today, you're the older brother. You judge a book by its cover. You feel like you don't like the fact that when someone gets radically saved, God blesses them. And you're like, I'm always with you. You don't ever bless me. Your job is to rejoice at what the Father rejoices in. And God's not mad. Like, what's beautiful is the Father's not mad at the older brother either. You notice that? He reasons with him. He's not angry with him. He's like, oh, hey, listen, we're always together. All that I have is yours. Like, but it's cool. Like, your brother's here. But I also believe that there are many of you who are watching this right now. You're enjoying all the inheritance that God has given you, but you're doing it outside the Father's presence. And maybe it's not tonight, but at some point you're going to realize, like the younger brother realizes, that in my Father's house there's blessing. And what I want you to know is that God is waiting for you to come home. He's watching every evening on that hillside, waiting for you just to make your decision to come back home. And if you do, he is going to jump out of his seat. He's going to run to you. He's going to embrace you. He's not going to let you finish your whole story. And he's going to say, let's clean you up because I've been waiting for you. And if that's you and you're here tonight, I think you heard my story tonight because God wants to make your story his story, but you have to come home. And he's inviting you home. He's not saying fix this or fix that. He's just saying just come home. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to say yes to Jesus, to return home in just a moment. And if you have yet to return home, let's do it tonight. Does that mean that you're not going to get judged by church people? No, you're going to get judged by church people. There's older brothers in church. That's how it works. But God's working on them too. God's working on them too. But just come home. And when you find yourself in the presence of God, then all of a sudden, all the gifts and the inheritance and all that he has placed in your life, you'll begin to realize why it's all really there. The ways you use things for things that are outside of God, God will leverage them for things in his kingdom. So let's bow our heads and our hearts and pray, shall we? Father, I want to thank you so much for calling me home. I want to thank you that even though I squandered so much, I wasted so much time, I hurt so many people, I made so many mistakes, that when I turned and respond to your invitation, you've loved me every single day. And Father, I want to thank you for your grace that is so radical, that you know everything about me and you love me still. And then you invite me to be a part of your family, the church, and you let me play a role in the work that you're doing. Lord, it's so humbling, it's so undeserved, but that's who you are. And Father, I ask that as a church family, we would never have the older brother mentality. We would look down on people who have made mistakes. But Lord, would that we